Good morning. This morning I'm in conversation with Phil Agulnik. I always get his name wrong when I pronounce it, and he always laughs at me. Phil is the Product Development Director for entitledto. entitledto, for those who don't know, they're one of the leading providers of online benefit calculators in the UK. Their products are absolutely excellent, and certainly goodness me, I've been using them for many years. Good morning, Phil.
Hello, David. Thanks for having us on.
We're very grateful to you today for sponsoring these sessions, and really this is an opportunity for us to tell the world more about your company. And I think a lot of the people on the call today will know of your existence. But it's interesting. I just wonder how have you been coping in the pandemic? How has your company been coping?
Well, I mean, it hasn't had a big effect on us as many people because we all worked from home anyway. We've never had a physical office just because of the way we've been set up. So that bit was fine. It did affect me in terms of childcare and a couple of members of staff. So we've been stretched, but hopefully not beyond the limit. And I think we're all back on board now. Fortunately, no one's been ill and no one's had serious illness among relatives. So not too bad. Thank you very much for asking.
Excellent. Well, that's very good news. I assume that all your work in relation to council tax reduction schemes has been continuing through the pandemic. You've been carrying out your review. How's that been going?
It's been going well. We've done it with the New Policy Institute. So they are a think tank, and they used to run a survey separately from us. So there were kind of two council tax board surveys, and now we're doing one survey, and they've done the analysis in this report that we've done on our council tax reduction survey.
It's interesting looking at the wider picture of council tax reduction schemes, particularly through the pandemic. We've had the hardship scheme and all the problems with council tax repayments, and I get really nervous as I hear more and more people changing their schemes and fear that it's pushing people into poverty. But at least we get some sort of positive stories from local authorities changing their schemes. How are things? What's been the highlights of your review? For example, how have the minimum payment amounts changed over the years since the CTR was introduced?
So in terms of the volume of change this year, the schemes changing April 21 has been less than usual, and one assumes that that's a COVID effect. So only something like 20 schemes have changed in total, and a bit under half of those have changed to banded schemes. That's less than the turnover we normally see.
Right. But what about these banded schemes? They seem to be growing in number. They make anything that's banded makes me nervous. How are they evolving? Are they still working well?
I can't comment on whether they're working well or not because I don't administer council tax reduction. So all I can do is tell you that the ones that exist, and there are about 70 odd of them, are they're all very variable. That's the politest thing to say. There's no discernible pattern between some which have, half a dozen bands, and at the other extreme, there's one with 800 bands. And they also vary in terms of the type of income they're measuring and who's vulnerable and that sort of thing. So there are 70 banded schemes, but that sort of means that there are sort of maybe not 70 different banded schemes, but at least sort of maybe a dozen or 20 different kind of schemes out there. They're very variable.
How do they affect the number of claims? Are they having an adverse effect on people claiming?
No, not particularly. You know what? I'm going to return to one thing which you mentioned I haven't picked up on, which is the minimum payment. Okay, right. I think the banded schemes, they don't really affect the number of claimants. We don't think, or certainly maybe not in a negative way. But what they do tend to be associated with a bit is going back to 100% reduction for people at the bottom. So we have found that not always, but more often than not, when you introduce an income banded scheme, you introduce a more generous and sometimes zero rate band for the poorest. But in terms of number of claimants, really what's going on, we think, is that take-up is going through the floor as universal credit expands. So the total number of benefit claimants last year went up a bit over 50%, as you'd expect, because of the pandemic. But the CTR claims only seem to be up about 10%. So there's really two effects from CTR. One is kind of the cuts that are in the scheme rules, which is what the survey is about. And then there's this kind of hidden cut of it's more difficult to claim, it's a separate form, you can tick the UC box, and because it's not a national scheme, people aren't promoting it. And in all likelihood, in total numbers, it's probably that hidden take-up effect, which is actually bigger than the headline cuts. So the headline cuts themselves are quite substantial.
So why are local authorities moving to banded schemes? What's the attraction, if there is an attraction?
So with banded schemes, we believe that it's simplification and reducing admin costs. So fundamentally, universal credit creates a problem, which is this variation in awards. And in any case, because council tax benefit is now administered separately, you want to try and find, if you can, ways to make it easier to administer. And the belief is that banded schemes make it simpler in the context of universal credit, because it helps to reduce the effect of these variations, particularly for weekly paid people. But more generally, the belief is it's a simpler scheme to administer, full stop.
So it doesn't make the schemes more complex then?
I think the argument is the reverse. I don't think there's anyone who can come along and put a measure to it and say, this is more complicated or this is simpler. But even if they could, the next sentence would say, this is fairer, this is less fair. So 6 income bands is clearly simpler, but you could argue it's not fair. 800 income bands isn't particularly simple, but it's probably really fair.
So are there any patterns evolving across the country with these schemes?
Not that we can detect. We really believe that it's just down to local decision making, local councillors, local officers. We can't really see a pattern, which in a sense goes back to your first comment, which is we don't, apart from saying there is financial pressure on councils, we're really not clear on why some schemes are changing and why some aren't. And kind of the absence of a pattern is a little bit of a red flag in terms of the overall policy.
So in terms of the work you've been doing, where can people get their hands on your research? Are you going to publish?
So the report is published. So if you go to entitledto.co.uk/CTR 2021, a blog will come up and then you can link to the report from that. And we've got a whole bunch of material on banded schemes and the like, which if you email me at phil@entitledto.co.uk, I will happily send to you.
Okay, we'll get those addresses up on the screen so that people can actually contact you. In terms of your product, when you do these surveys, do you tailor make the sort of the calculation model to each individual scheme? So if you've got 70 different schemes, exactly. you actually recalculate 70 times for them.
Correct. Yeah. So what we've got is a series of rules, and we know the postcode, so we know the local authority, and we started off with kind of 3 or 4 rules, which is what's the minimum payment, who's vulnerable, and is there a band cap? And we kind of thought it might stay like that, but in fact we've ended up with about more than 100 of these options for different things that people have done. But yeah, we set up a scheme individually for each local authority, and that is why we are now doing a council tax modelling service, because we're making use of that ability, combining it with SHIBI data or CTR 6 something data, and then modelling that so you can see the effect of applying Cambridge's scheme or a different banded scheme in your area easily.
Yeah. So with the migration of universal credit continuing, has that changed your marketplace, or you just your product is just sort of still sitting there in the delivering the same service to people? It's just changing the profile basically.
It just changes the profile. Yeah, we know that more the people going through are already on UC. I think the other effect is because managed migration has gone backwards because of the pandemic. That whole issue about managed migration versus natural migration onto universal credit, that's been parked, if you like. And of course, we've also had the £20 uplift, but we haven't known whether it's permanent. So I think the emphasis will switch back towards managed migration as we go into 22 and all the issues that brings up. For us, we're just trying to get functionality that works for different people. So if you're a legacy claimant, we're giving you information about your legacy benefits and your UC and about what triggers a change of circumstance. But obviously, if you're already on universal credit, we don't do any of that because there's no new claims to legacy, as we all know.
So in terms of your modelling tool, so is this a modelling service? So you offer people a comprehensive service where you gather their data and model it for them? Is that the approach you take?
It's their data, so it's typically Shibi data or other local data extracts, and you can combine that with other data sources. And we're working with Data Tank on that aspect of it, who are data experts. And then we take that data set and we run it through our modeling engine. So it's we turn the model from the bulk file, and then we just give you back that Excel spreadsheet so you can look at all the individual households in your claim. I should have said the data is all anonymized. So we've got 5,000 rows of data representing 5,000 claims. And basically we say, this is what they get now. Option 1 looks like this, option 2 looks like this, option 3 looks like that.
I don't think this is a question I've ever really asked you, so I hope I'm not sort of putting you on the spot. But what do you do? Do you do anything for Wales and for Scotland?
So for Wales and Scotland, obviously we're getting their scheme in place. So the way we work with Scotland is we're in contact with the Scottish Government, so they can look at the calculator and see if there's anything wrong with it. We have done a little bit of experimental work with them, so they can think about. They did have a CTR 21 regulations that they were going to bring forward, but they parked it because of the pandemic. So way back when, we were helping a little bit with their CTR 21 regulations in Scotland, but that was a victim of the pandemic.
Because it's really quite interesting, because obviously with devolution, particularly in Scotland, they've set up their own social security department, and of course they've now got their Scottish only benefit. So I suppose for you that just poses more challenges.
Yeah, so we've got Scottish child payment in there, and obviously we're putting all the other ones. And yeah, that's our expectation, is that it will increasingly evolve. So at the moment we just do it through the postcode. If it continues to devolve, we'll have to sort of think more thoroughly about how to deal with people in Scotland, and whether we should kind of treat it as a separate system. For the moment, we just make sure that we include all those Scottish benefits alongside things like Scottish flexibilities in universal credit and obviously the Scottish council tax reduction scheme.
It's interesting, as the noise continues about the unacceptability of property taxes, and everyone screams for sort of council tax reform. I have this dream that the domestic property tax actually starts with a calculation like yours, and so everybody gets their bill that's actually aligned to their means. So we do it the other way around. Instead of expecting them to apply, we actually assess their liability on the basis of their means. Do you think that's something that we should strive for?
Yeah, what you described there, David, I think is not a million miles away from a local income tax. The key difference with benefits is it's a household that you're looking at, so you have to ask the income of both members of the couple, which is the correct approach. But income tax is based on individuals. Yeah, I think that's a pretty sensible type of approach. I think the other thing which is possible in terms of coming into the mix is going to be around energy efficiency of households and how the council tax can be used as a green tax. So I hope that the Scottish Government does start to really put council tax reform on the agenda, because the council tax reduction scheme inherently has been orphaned by universal credit, and inherently council tax in its current form is not an enough amount of money to warrant the really big kind of means test involved in something like council tax benefit, but it's too much money to kind of be passported. So it's betwixt and between at the moment, and I think the whole system needs to be thought of, including the council tax side and the benefit side as one big system.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the relationship between tax and ability to pay is absolutely critical. And the point you make about local income tax and schemes getting closer to local income tax is most likely the way forward, looking well ahead. Phil, in terms of the company, where do you see entitledto going over the next 5 years?
To be honest, it's all in the title. Because we're called entitledto, we're always just going to be going on about take up date. That's really what's going to be happening. I mean, I think take up is going to become more of an issue, just because there's much less rhetoric around contributory benefits. There's been a bit of a debate about basic income, but it hasn't really taken off. I think people have accepted that we're going to have means tested benefits, and means tested benefits have always got a problem about take up, and there's always going to be a need to work on it. So more of the same, I suspect.
Well, that's lovely. Well, thank you very much, Phil, for your contribution today. I will be putting your that web address and your email address up on the screen so that people can see those. And I will look forward to reading your latest report. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Phil, Phil and the team. You can get them online. Their website is there for all to see. It's a very friendly website. I recommend it to you. Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you for sponsoring today.
Thank you, David. Cheerio.